Thanks for bringing up our spotlight event with Veronica Roth, talking about her newest book, One Among Crows, a fantasy novel set in modern-day Chicago, inspired by Polish folklore. We have Stark Holborn joining us today as well, author of the sci-fi series Factus Sequence, most recent Ninth Life out this summer. Stark will be chatting with Veronica for the first 45 minutes of this event today, and then there will be a chance at the end for you all to ask Veronica any questions that you have as well. So if you think of anything throughout, there will be a chance at the end. I'll have a mic, so we will pan to that afterwards. And I'm going to hand this over to Veronica and Stark now. Thanks so much.
Hi, everyone. Oh, bless you.
Sorry to call attention to it.
This is often a great start.
Just made it really a lot worse. Okay.
Hello, everyone. I'm Stark Holborn, as Gabriela said. I'm the author of the Factus Sequence, published by Titan, also the Trigonometry series, and the groundbreaking digital serial Nunslinger. I'm also a games writer, but I'm absolutely delighted to be here interviewing Veronica. Hello, Veronica.
Hi.
Hi. I think most people here probably know you, but you want to do a quick intro?
Yeah, so if you know me, it's probably from the Divergent series, which is what I wrote to start off with, but I've written a bunch of other books. There's a space fantasy called Carve the Mark, contemporary fantasy called Chosen Ones, dystopian mystery called Poster Girl, and then these two, Arch-Conspirator and One Among Crows. And Arch-Conspirator is Antigone, but like in the far, far future. And One Among Crows is Polish fantasy in Chicago, so. I think that's everything. It's been a while, guys, since Divergent, so a few books.
They're both incredibly cool, these books, and we'll be talking about them in a bit. So just to kick things off, this is, you've sort of been in London. Have you been here before? Have you had a chance to see anything new while you're here?
Yeah, I've been here. I think this is my 4th time in London, but the other 3 times were all around the time of Divergent, the movies being adapted. So I don't remember that very well. It was very stressful and intense. So this time I actually got to kind of wander around and eat food and stuff, which is nice. I've never been to Canary Wharf before, but I'm told that's not, it's not a can't miss. Exactly.
I mean, it's there.
It's okay.
Yeah.
Listen, the Elizabeth line on the tube, A+.
Okay, we all love the Elizabeth line.
Yeah, I've heard good things, and then I wrote it, and I was like, yes. I love trains, in case that wasn't obvious. Keep writing about them.
And the DLR. But anyway, this will not be about trains, this entire band. I mean,
or will
it could be.
If we run out of stuff to say. I don't think we will.
No, it'll be fine. My favorite train journey. No. So obviously you've talked a bit about, you're known for your Divergent series. The ones we want to talk about today, though, I think primarily are these two, which is When Among Crows and Arch-Conspirator. They're both novellas. And I think at the moment the novella is having a bit of a renaissance. We're seeing some amazing novellas coming out, obviously, by yourself, by authors like Primi Mohammed, Niveau, Martha Wells, obviously. And I'm really pleased to see that they're becoming more popular, or at least there's sort of more awareness of them amongst sort of mainstream publishers. So novellas are obviously a very different beast to novels, especially trilogies. So I kind of wanted to start off talking about how you had the kernel of the ideas for these books, and whether you always knew they were going to be novellas, whether they started as short stories and sprawled, or whether they started as novels and kind of became more condensed.
Yeah, so I didn't actually think of ever writing a novella, but then Arch-Conspirator, I had the idea for Arch-Conspirator, so I don't know how many of you had to read Antigone or read it by your own free will.
Show of hands, Antigone.
Yeah. Woohoo! Okay,
Classics
great.
nerds unite.
I love it. So it's my favorite of the Greek tragedies that I've read, and I find it to be, there's a lot of talk about like kind of feminist retellings of old stories, but I don't think Antigone requires a feminist retelling, which is an interesting thing. Like if you reread that play now, it is shocking how modern she feels as a character, how intelligent she is, how she uses the power at her disposal to fight for herself and for something bigger. So I think she's kind of an incredible character. But a play is, because it's small, felt like it had to be a novella. That's kind of the size that it is. So I really used the play as an outline, even though the story is set in the far future, and it has a lot of futuristic technology, especially around reproductive technology. I don't know how to describe this. Anyway, so it has all that futuristic stuff, but the beats are definitely the beats of the play. So I think that was the first novella, like the reason it has to be a novella. But then I just kind of liked it. Because I don't know about you, but if I can write a book in like 2 months. I feel pretty good about that.
Yep.
So, but there has to be like a reason that it's short.
Yeah, because it requires a different use of language and plotting and structure. You have to be much more concise.
Yes.
And so you have to know kind of what you're doing, and everything has to have its place. And the thing I loved about Arch Conspirator as well, it does feel like scenes, the chapters, and they're so vivid as a result because they all sort of take place in these very striking settings.
Well, it's like everything that you put into a novella. Have you written novellas?
Yes, yeah.
Okay, yeah. So everything you put in there has to serve a purpose in a way that, like, it, I suppose should be the case for a book, right? But it's just much more focused and intentional with a novella. And the good thing about them as a reader is you can just sit down with it on a flight, like a 2-hour flight, and read the whole thing.
Yeah, which is great. And it's lovely when people do that for your novels, when they say, oh, I read this whole thing in 3 hours. And you're like, oh, thanks, it took me a year.
It took me so long to write that.
Yeah. I mean, I take it as a compliment. It means people are enjoying
it's
it.
great. It's
but
great.
It's also like,
But it hurts a little bit.
It hurts a little bit.
Yeah.
But this is, I think, with novellas, and then the idea of everything kind of being concise. Yeah, of course, novels, it has to have its place, but I think ideas-wise as well, you have so much less space to get this across. And with characters as well, it can be interesting to try and choose, especially when you have multiple POVs, which you do. You somehow manage to have this big cast of really fascinating characters, but in a novella form, which is, I think, is not something I've seen in very many novellas. They tend to be focused on sort of first-person protagonists. So was that a challenge, kind of thinking, I'm obviously using the player's structure, but thinking, okay, how much time do I get to spend with each of these people?
I think it helped, like, to have the play as a framework, because each character in the play has a distinct motivation, so they're very focused themselves. So, like, I know their goal, their one goal, and that's a thing in a novella, is they get to have one goal. In a book, a person can have a lot of different things that they want, and there's room for lots of kind of subplots, and just like to kind of flesh out a whole person in a way that there's not a lot of space for in a novella. But then in When Among Crows, the reason it's a novella is that I have 3 main characters, and I wanted to see how much of a relationship I could develop between them in like a 36-hour time frame. So that was the unique challenge of it, is it's very tight timeline-wise, and I wanted this kind of feeling of trust to develop with these people, but how much can I get you to believe that they trust and love each other in this time? Is kind of and then there's, of course, challenges to that trust. So that was the challenge of that one. But I kind of like it. I like the pressure of it. I think it's good creatively.
Yeah, I mean, I love a novella as well. My debut novel, Nunslinger, is actually 12 novellas all stuck together.
What, really?
Yeah, and I was writing them as they were being published. So every 3 months, another 3 novellas. So I don't remember any of that year.
So how did you keep track of the whole like arc of it? Did you plan that?
Sorry,
I'm just going to interview you about this now.
In my mind, which is why I don't remember. No, it was an absolute exercise in pantsing. I just pants my way through the whole thing.
I'm impressed.
Yeah, I think it worked.
You want to do it again?
No. No, it was 180,000 words in the end.
Oh my God,
which it was it's a chunky book now when it's all together.
That's extremely cool.
But it was fun because I got to do cliffhangers, because I knew people would wait 3 months for the next novella, so I put a horrible cliffhanger in.
It feels like a format that should come back, like the serial
I'd be
novel.
happy to see it come back. Yeah,
that would be good. And you'd be like, I was there first.
I was there first. Yeah, I did it back in the day. Did it make you want or tempted? I don't know if you've done any screenwriting or writing plays. Were you tempted to sort of get into the play format?
No, not really. No. I don't know. I feel like screenwriting's a whole different thing. It's like taking all the parts that I don't like out, or the parts that I do like out, and then leaving me with some of the stuff I don't like. So I don't know if I'll ever do it. But yeah, writing shorter is always an important challenge for me. I write short fiction every now and then, and it is always extremely, extremely difficult, I think, but in a good way for a writer, because you have to really think about like, what do I mean to say, and what's important to me. So.
Yeah, and it's something with which I was wondering about when I was reading Arch Conspirator, about sort of what's important, and whether this was obviously lots of us read Antigone back in the day. I mean, are you sort of a classics nerd in general, or was this one that just really stuck with you?
Yeah, we had to read a few in school. There was Oedipus and Oedipus at Colonus, and then Antigone. So I kind of, and people talk about Oedipus like it's the best, but Antigone is the shit, so everyone should read it.
Yeah, it really is, and it does, you're right, it feels so modern still.
Yeah.
I love studying it as well. But how much, I mean, a lot of the talk about mythologies and rewriting and retellings is about looking for the gaps in the story that have been left behind. And I feel this wasn't so much that, because you're kind of resituating it into a different landscape. But was that a challenge, kind of thinking, like looking for the stories that might not have been brought out to light? And maybe it's something that's more that we get more in When Among Crows, because you obviously have all these sort of supernatural creatures which are kind of being redefined in a way by their humanity or lack thereof.
Yeah, I think, sorry, I'm just gathering my thoughts about both of these at the same time. With When Among Crows, it was definitely like a little bit strange, because so my mother is Polish and then moved to America when she was a kid. And so I have this relationship to being Polish, but I don't feel Polish, really. So I don't have the language, and we only had some of the cultural practices and traditions. So approaching the folklore was a little intimidating, because you feel like this doesn't belong to me. Like, I don't get to own it. But like you do, because folklore is always being kind of modernized and changed. Like now we call things urban legends, but that's just modern folklore. That's just how it works. And folklore always speaks about the people who are telling it in the moment that they're telling it. So it changes over time. So kind of making use of it is not as disrespectful as it feels, because it should be updated and it should continue to live and breathe and tell you about the culture that it comes from. So I try to think of it that way, approaching with deep respect for Polish culture, but also knowing that it comes from this perspective I have of being in like Polish diaspora kind of. And especially in Chicago's one of the largest Polish populations outside of Poland. And so it has, like, it's really kind of baked into the city, especially in its like the certain areas, where Polish populations used to be like condensed. So I don't know, taking charge of it in that way was difficult, but I think a good exercise for connecting to that part of my history and to the history of the city especially. So yeah.
Yeah, no, absolutely. And some of my favorite examples of fiction, and so I love stories that could only have been written by one person at a particular time. And I think these are examples of that. It's your own particular experience and take, and all of the idiosyncrasies that come with it. That's what makes these books, well, it's why they exist, and it's what makes them great books as well. So. I really wanted to ask about Chicago, actually, because I love that blend of urban fantasy, and it really feels like this works kind of embedding this like kind of supernatural and the magical into the quite gritty landscape in places. There's the bars and the little cinemas and stuff. Are there any kind of Easter eggs that people who know Chicago might be like?
Well, there's the funniest one. I remember going into my husband's office the day that I made this joke, and I was like, guess what? I made the best joke. And he was like, okay. But the legend surrounding Baba Yaga is that she lives in a house on chicken legs, and in this book, she lives on top of a Harold's Chicken, which is a local chain in Chicago, and I was like, I'm so clever. So I guess that's an Easter egg. But otherwise, I don't know. There's some real places in the book, like there's the Uptown Theater, which has been abandoned, or I don't know if it's abandoned, but it's definitely like in disrepair. It has been that way since I've lived in Chicago, which is like for 10 years. And it's a beautiful building. It's like the last of the big movie palaces. And it suffered some kind of like explosive water damage at some point, and no one has the money to repair it, but also no one is buying it to tear it down because it's like this beautiful historical building. So I set a scene there and had to look up a lot of weird pictures because you're not allowed to go in there. So
it would be so tempting to break in, wouldn't it?
Yes, it would, but I don't want to get arrested. But there's also
Don't listen to me.
I know, you're a bad influence already. But yeah. But then there's some fake places. Like there's a bar in the book. It's supposed to be funny. The these creatures from Polish folklore are like living in a kind of creature underworld in Chicago, and the ones who eat fear, that's the Zmora, they're like a nightmare creature. That's what it's like, Zmare or whatever. It's nightmare is what it means. But they're a creature in the folklore that like creeps into your room at night and sits on your chest and like gives you bad dreams and sucks out your life force so you wake up exhausted. That's the kind of creature of myth. But in this book, they just eat fear. That's like, they're like vampires that eat fear instead of blood. But anyway, so they have this like bar and it's full of Halloween kitsch. So it's like drinking out of plastic goblets and like red smoking drinks and all this.
I love that detail.
So, you know, I try to have a sense of humor in urban fantasy. I think it's a good thing.
There's the scene in the taxi where one of the Zmoras, she's just smiling creepily, and then the driver's being like,
There's something weird about this lady. Yeah.
She's getting increasingly slightly weirded out.
Yeah, but I love urban fantasy. I grew up reading it, so it was good to go back to it.
What are some of your favorite urban fantasies that you read?
I was obsessed with the books by Rob Thurman when I was young, and I feel like nobody knows those. Every time I mention them, everyone's like,
this is good.
Which is
Add to the TBR. It's not like I've got a problem with the TBR pile.
The first one was called Nightlife. I don't know. They were great. But now I'm, of course, drawing a blank on anything else I've ever read. Rob Thurman, check her out.
We can come back to that later. But yeah, so obviously, the setting of Chicago is really important in this one. The kernel of the idea, is that kind of where it came from? Like situating the idea of kind of the Polish folklore within the city. Was that the kind of goal of the book, or did you have a kind of character first? Because there's some pretty strong character stuff going on here, especially with the swords, and I don't want to give too much away.
Yeah, okay. It's hard with this book because the actual inspiration story from it is a spoiler. So I had the idea for this character. I'm trying to think of a way to explain. There's a character on a mission to do something, but it's not what you think. So he's on a mission to take revenge, but the revenge quest is a lot different than you think it is. That's probably a good way to explain it. But someone does pull a sword out of their spine, and I feel that is metal as hell, and I'm into it. So as an idea, that's partly where it came from. That too.
Yeah, it's as kind of gory as it sounds as well.
And
sometimes.
My editor was like, "More blood, please." Which is a rare thing from an editor.
Yeah, I mean that's great when they're like more weird, more blood.
Yeah, more weird.
Yeah, I was like, who's your editor? But no, we'll get that afterwards.
I know. Come over. It's fine.
Yeah. Were you speaking of revenge? Obviously, there's sort of an element of it. Antigone, are you tempted by Electra?
By Electra?
By Electra.
I tried to think about that actually. I like Electra too, but no, it felt too similar in a way.
Yeah.
Like, if you look at the actual beats of it, it's similar to Antigone in some ways. I don't know. Yeah. I thought about Medea, too. But
that is just
anything
wild.
where... I took a class in college where it was just, like, revenge tragedies was what it was called. And in a lot of them, people will, like, kill someone's family and then bake them into a pie and feed it to them. And this is, like, a thing that repeats. It's like Titus Andronicus and the... Demon Barber, what's that musical? Yeah, Sweeney Todd, and Medea, I think, has the eating of the pies. Uh-oh, do we lose you? Oh, no. Here.
The Revenger's tragedy, I think it happens, like, that's kind of Renaissance, but again, more pie eating.
Yeah, it's gross. It's also a South Park episode. Do you want me to poke it? No. Here, hold on. I feel like, yeah, I got it. Hold on. Nope. I think it might be out of batteries. Do we lose it? Great. Here, wait. I feel like an expert now. Uh-oh. Okay, wait. Yeah.
Hello. Yes. Woo!
Yay.
Tech expert. Thank you for that.
Not one button, second button.
Yeah.
Yeah.
But yeah, so obviously now we're talking about sort of classic revenge tragedies, which are great. So it kind of leads me on because I wanted to ask about your research process a bit. Are you a kind of heavy researcher? Do you kind of spend time doing like a couple of months of research and then diving into it, or are you much more like, okay, I need this detail now and this detail now? And obviously this one's sort of much more contemporary set. This is far future, so yeah. differences between the two, similarities?
Definitely different. Yeah, with Arch-Conspirator, I did a lot of research in advance because there's so much available. So that was really helpful. I read several different translations of Antigone just to get a sense of, all the different ways that it could be translated. And then read a lot of scholarship about specifically like the incest part of Antigone. So basically, Antigone herself is the product of incest because of Oedipus is her father, who married, his mother and killed his father. That's the whole thing about Oedipus. Anyway, I didn't want to include incest in the book for reasons, some of which just because it's different to us now, but also because kind of at the time when Antigone was written, there's this feeling of kind of mystical, like she's got a curse on her because of her bloodline. So they didn't understand what the effects of that would be, but now we understand a lot about it. So it's very kind of technical and biological to us. And I wanted to restore some of the mystical feeling of why she's cursed, what's wrong with her. So in Arch-Conspirator, she's not the product of an incestuous relationship. She is, she's born naturally. She's not gene edited. So she's cursed because of that instead. So I think that was kind of my way of approaching it. But I did want to understand how it was received by people at the time. And so I could figure out how to make something that would be understandable to us in the same way, if that makes sense. So I had to,
absolutely.
yeah.
No, yeah. So I was listening because I was
No,
fascinated
okay.
by that idea of, how kind of, again, how contemporary it sort of feels in terms of people's response to Antigone as a product.
It's not a part of the play, I guess, but it's such a big part of her and the way that she's received by the people around her that you need to find a way to make her seem, she's in a powerful position, but she's also cursed. She's got this darkness kind of hanging around her when people talk to her. So I think that was a big part of it. But yeah, so a lot of research in advance for that one. For When Among Crows, I did only as much research as was strictly necessary until the second draft, and then I was like, and did a lot of research about the history of immigration in Chicago, specifically Polish immigration, but also immigration in general, because there's the magic system in When Among Crows. Sorry, we're now bouncing back and forth between these two books, which are very different from each other, so good luck, everyone.
Hey, look, no judgment about science fiction or fantasy.
Yeah, we don't care.
Yeah, right. We like it all.
But the magic system is based on a system of debt and repayment. So where people have really put a lot of blood, sweat, and tears into something, there's great potential for magic in that part of the world. And in Chicago, where people have poured a lot of blood, sweat, and tears, comes from the immigrant populations that built the city. So especially the steel workers and the sort of steel mill by the lake, which is another scene that's in there. So I wanted to know as much as possible about that. And all the little places in Chicago that would have great potential for magic. So that was where a lot of the research came in. And the folklore, which is all in Polish, which again, I do not speak. So I was using Google Translate a lot.
Yeah, and then when you find the perfect source, and you're like, I just can't read it.
Yeah, I just can't. Yeah.
Yeah.
So I do my best. A lot of it is, a lot of the scholarship that's in English is Russian. So that's a little weird for Polish people because it's not the same, but it does have a lot of overlap. So I don't know. It's tricky.
I love the idea of debt in magic systems because it's such a sort of a classic thing in a way of making bargains that you don't quite understand, and then there's a sort of an owing.
When does it turn on you?
Yeah, exactly.
Does it get tricky?
Yeah, careful what you wish for. Which I just thought that was a really interesting approach to a sort of magic system. And I think both of these books tackle with a theme of kind of redefining systems of power and control. And kind of was that something you kind of had central in your mind, or was it just obviously something that you're kind of drawn to as an interesting theme to explore through the work?
Yeah, I think I must be obsessed with it. I don't know, because I think dystopian fiction is always about systems of power. So I did a little world building class on Twitch a couple of years ago, poorly attended, but we had a good time. And it was a lot about developing systems and deciding how strong the system in your work is going to be. So when I talk about systems, I mean religions, governments, schools, and I love a really strong system. So a kind of oppressive regime is the perfect example of that. I think a good example of the opposite is have you guys played Breath of the Wild, the newest Zelda? That's a weak system, right? There's a government kind of. It's like post-apocalyptic fantasy. So
It is, yeah, and it's weird like that because it's kind of cozy, but at the same time you're like, oh, it's bad stuff.
yeah, it's just like wreckage everywhere you look. I love that game. It's so good. Anyway, now I'm thinking about that and forgetting about what but yeah, so I think exploring like systems of power is always going to be a point of fascination for me. So I don't know if I'm doing it well, but I'm doing it. So
I think definitely doing it well. And it's funny when people say, oh, these are the themes in your work, and you're
yeah,
like, are they?
do you know the book that you're writing over and over again? Like, are you aware of the story you keep writing?
Yeah. I'm aware of it now.
What is it?
And then it's basically two people who hate each other coming to find common ground.
Oh.
And then I had an idea, and I was like, this would be great. And it's the same book that I've written 3 times now.
You know what? Just go for it.
Yeah.
That's my feeling about it.
Yeah, it's basically like a buddy comedy, or buddy road trip, but then with 2 characters from completely opposing viewpoints.
I love it.
Yeah, and then I looked at my Wikipedia the other day and I was like, oh, Stockholm explores themes of guilt and redemption. I'm like, oh,
Good job for me, I guess.
oh, good, thanks. Which is always strange, the kind of when people read themes into your work that either aren't there or aren't necessarily kind of what you were going for at the time.
Mm-hmm.
I
I mean, that happened with Arch Conspirator. People were like, this is a book about reproductive justice. And I was like, really? Great.
it's not about.
No, it certainly isn't like a complete accident. I just didn't really think about it at the time. But I'm glad it's there. It's great.
And something that is always a challenge, especially writing a series, is writing follow-ups. And I mean, there's always the classic thing about the difficult second book, or a kind of tricky to keep a story going. But I just wonder if you could tell us a little bit about what you're working on next, because I know there might be a follow-up in the works.
So I'm writing a sequel to One Among Crows now, which is exciting. Yeah. So I haven't written a sequel in a long time. I think the last time was the sequel to Carve the Mark, and then Divergent before it. So haven't written that many, but it's been going well, I think. Mm-hmm. Yeah, I don't know what else I can say about it. Takes place at a funeral. That's all.
Okay.
Yeah.
Exploring similar themes, different. Oh, I know anything's gonna be spoilers. Okay.
Yeah, I don't really, and plus, you don't really know the themes till like 3 months after you're finished.
As we've just established, that's true. And then someone else will tell you what those themes are.
Yeah, I'm just waiting for someone to do that. Yeah.
What is your writing process in general then, approaching, I mean, on a kind of a very kind of practical level? Some people write at night, some people write in the morning, some people will do 7 hours sat in one place, or 50 words at a time. So take us through a little bit of your writing process.
Yeah, sure. So I definitely used to try to write things without planning. That was Divergent. I wrote it without planning it, and then tried to plan out the series but didn't know how to plan things. So you can see that, I think, if you look carefully in the last book of the Divergent series, which I'm proud of for many reasons, but this moment is not my favorite, which is that they get, outside of their usual area, and then there's 30 pages of explanation of what's actually going on, like in the village, when she leaves the village and is like, oh God, modernity. That sort of happens in the Divergent series, and it's because there's no outline. Anyway, I just want to acknowledge some growth that I've gone through. Anyway, so after that experience of seeing that happen to myself and not being able to fix it because it was too late, I was never again. So after that, I became someone who outlines, which has been great. So I used to feel that outlining things would take the feeling of discovery out of writing, but I've found that it doesn't. So I still discover things as I write. They're a little different. Sometimes a thing I have planned doesn't work. Sometimes I get a new idea that's better in the middle, and I always change my plan, but I do plan. And so the actual process of writing is that I try and write in the morning, while I have my tea, and then I go exercise and eat lunch and stuff, and then I go back and write again in the afternoon. And if I'm really feeling ambitious, I'll write again at night because I'm really deep into something and obsessed with it, but that's pretty rare and not terribly good for me emotionally or mentally. So I try not to do that too often. But yeah, it's that's kind of how it works. I don't know. What's your process like?
Very similar. Mornings, I wish I could be someone who writes all night and when no one else is around, but unfortunately I'm just terrible in the evenings. I basically can't. After I eat, I just get so sleepy. So
like a cat.
Yeah, basically cat-like. So I have to do mornings, and then I'll try and delay lunch for as long as possible, because then once I stop, I'm done for a few hours in the afternoon. So yeah, mornings are kind of my sacred time. And I try not to look at emails or news or anything until I'm done with that.
Would you describe yourself as fast or slow as a writer?
Quite fast once I'm going.
Yeah, same.
I kind of have to. For me, it's once I get the first line of a book in my head, I kind of know that we're good to go. Like, here we go. And
happy for you. Doesn't happen to me.
And then I sometimes have to wait till I get into a bit of a fey mood and then sit there and kind of start doing it. But so quite fast. I think my last novel I wrote in probably about 3 months. So I don't know if that's fast or slow.
That's fast, yeah, I think so. But I think the important thing about writing is people do their thinking at different times.
Exactly, yeah.
So a lot of people just let an idea cook for like years, you know, and then when they sit down to write it, like I think John Scalzi is that way, if you've read any John Scalzi, Starter Villain, most recently, I think. Anyway, I think he just kind of lets things bake, and then he writes it, and he barely does any revising, because he's just like, I thought it through. And I admire that a lot, but that's not how it works for me. I kind of think I'm thinking it through, and then I write a draft, and that's really what I'm, like it's a thinking draft. And then I feel like I actually know what the story is about after I've written the rough draft, which, you know what, I don't recommend it as a process. It doesn't work very well.
Every time I start a new book, I'm like, I don't know how to do this. How did I do this before? Maybe I'll never do it again. maybe I'm done.
And how many have you written now?
10.
Yeah, so you know how to do it, but it's funny.
Yeah.
You're like, maybe I forgot. Maybe it doesn't work anymore.
And it does change. Like, writing process completely can change across books, and it's weird. You think you know exactly how it's going to go, not how it turns out at all. My latest book, I had a second book problem, wrote 3 absolutely horrendous drafts, panicked, and then rewrote the entire thing in 6 weeks before my deadline. And the way I got myself out of the hole was basically I had to go back to remembering what I loved about writing the first book and what I loved about writing this world in general. And once I did that and stopped thinking about expectation, then it kind of unlocked it for me. And so that was also my rule for the third book, which I wrote quite quickly and then gave to my editor, and he said, I don't think I need to do anything to this.
Oh, wow.
Which was horrifying for me.
Yeah, you're like, are you sure?
Yeah, I thought he was lying.
I think her name is Stephanie Perkins, an author, a great author, writes horror and used to write romance, which is a great transition, by the way, in a career. But she used to talk about writing a love list for each project that you're working on. So you just sort of write down all the things that you like, you know, whether it's like a little trope that you're like, oh, I'm so excited, or like the one scene that you're really excited about, or something you associate with it, and then you can kind of consult it in your second book. That's like maybe a good strategy.
Yeah.
But I don't know, I haven't tried that.
I think it goes back to having an idea of what the kernel, the original core idea was for the book, and that really helps me to think like, okay, what was it that sparked this idea off in me? Yeah. And returning to that kind of helps keep it on track.
Yeah.
I think
Why me? Why now?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Exactly. That's good. I sort of hesitate to give writing advice sometimes because it's so different for everyone, but I think a few things like that can be really helpful.
Yeah.
Is there anything that you kind of find yourself, you know, telling people when they ask, you know, for writing advice or writing tips? Or, I tend to tell people just remember to stretch your back.
Oh, yeah, that's good. Drink water. Yeah. As I've gone on, my writing advice has become less practical and more like life advice, I think, like emotional advice. But my advice is, having gone through some ups and downs in the industry, you have to love the act of writing itself. So if you're obsessed with the outcome, you're going to be disappointed because you can't control the outcome. Like some of the best books I've written have sold the worst. And, you know, some things I didn't think were amazing sold pretty well, and it just doesn't matter. Like it's not a meritocracy. It's not like if I just make it amazing, it will sell. That's unfortunately not how it works. So you have to love the process of doing it, because otherwise you'll go bananas. So I think a lot of people like the idea of writing, but the actual like sitting down to do it sort of bores or horrifies them. And if that's how you feel, like there are other ways to be creative and to tell stories. Maybe writing books is not the one, but you know, every writer has hard moments while writing, for sure. But like, at the end of the day, like I love the minutes that I spend doing it. And I think that's what's carried me through harder moments in my career. So that's kind of the advice that I have.
Absolutely, yeah, and that's it's kind of what I told myself for the book I just finished. I thought I have to love this process, otherwise there's no point in me doing it.
No, you
I
could do something else.
I could be doing something that
You, in fact, do something else, so you could just do that all the time.
no, yeah, get paid my day rate for games writing.
Yeah.
But, and I think it's a really good distinction between wanting to be published and wanting to write. I think if you want to be published, you're always going to hit that kind of wall of disappointment because you're not finding the value in the process itself.
Yeah.
Which is, I think is an incredibly important thing to remember.
But it's not like sexy advice.
No, yeah.
Yeah, well.
But also, again, everyone writes completely differently. You know, people's processes will always be different. You know, some people will have a spreadsheet and...
Oh, geez, those people.
Yep.
They have like a whole story Bible. What's that like? Brandon Sanderson. I don't know.
Is he here? No, he's not.
I don't know.
Send everyone running out. It's again, and I think it's just important to sort of remember, like, don't stop yourself from doing something because you think there is an established way of doing it.
Yeah.
And so I think in a while we're going to move on to questions. Not quite yet. There's a few things I would like to cover first. One of them, this is quite a question I tend to ask people as well. It's if you were in really big trouble, who would you call from both of these books to get you out of it? Which character?
Oh, jeez.
Sometimes I say, I'm not going to define the trouble, but we could define the trouble. Like maybe you have to get rid of a body.
Oh, okay. Get rid of a body.
Yeah.
Well, there's God, I can't say his name. I need to look it up.
Which one?
It's like Parthenopeus. Yeah.
Oh, okay, yeah.
Parth, we call him. Let's just call him that. Yeah, he seems like the one you call to get rid of a body in this book. He's like a tense ally of Antigone in this story, and he's very suspicious of her and of everyone. And I just feel like he's got connections. So, I think he's good. But in When Among Crows, it would be Nico, who is a striga or a strigon, which is like in this book they eat anger, so. All the creatures eat something. It's usually an emotion. So they eat anger, but they also like transform into these like very fierce owl people because that's the kind of mythos around the striga. But anyway, but he's like the only character I've ever written who's like kind of a cocky, like fun jerk type, which is not a type that I explore that often, and I love him. And he would definitely help me bury a body and not judge me, which is nice.
That is, yeah, excellent.
It's
an excellent
important.
person to have.
Yeah. I thought you were going to ask in my real life, and I was like making eye contact with. Anyway.
I mean, I know we've just met, but I would probably help you bury your body.
Oh, that's so nice of you. Thank you.
Yeah.
I wouldn't be good at it.
No, I mean any writers.
But you could ask me. I wouldn't judge you.
Oh, thanks. Thanks.
I can lift heavy things.
That's always a plus in this situation.
Well, you were here, for this moment, guys.
Yeah. Don't tell anyone.
Yeah, please keep it between us.
It's fine. It's always good to have that one character in your head. You're like, yeah, they would do it. And in my 10 No series, this character called the General. She's looks like in the first book, she looks like a 13-year-old girl. She's actually a genetically sort of engineered super soldier. So she just has nothing but contempt for most people. So she'd help, and then she'd be like, well, you're in my debt now. So
yeah,
I'll be calling in that favor.
I like it.
Yeah. It's always quite good to have. Are we on for questions now? So I think we've got some time for questions, and we should, in theory, have a microphone.
We'll see. Do you want me to do it? Yeah.
Just send your invoice to MCM afterwards for the tech support.
We could also just. Oh yeah. Okay. There we go. Wait. Hold on. It might be on standby. No.
You could have mine.
Yeah. Is it?
Yeah. All right.
Yay.
Perfect.
Also, questions, not comments, please. If you start rambling, I will tell you that you're rambling.
But you can ask either of us anything.
Yes,
basically.
absolutely.
Not anything. Just within reason.
Normal questions. If you've got questions, raise your hands. I'll bring this around. Okay, let's start.
Hi. So technically 2 questions from me. First one, you mentioned the stress of adapting the Divergent books into the movies. When you start a new book, does that stress ever come back as like a flashback of, oh, what if this happens again?
Oh, jeez, yeah.
A second question for both of you. What's the weirdest thing you've ever found when you're researching?
Oh, love that. Okay, I'm going to think about that. But as for the the adaptation stress. So I didn't have to adapt the Divergent books into movies, which was good, probably, because I don't screenwrite, as we have discussed. But yeah, it was stressful because like I was 23 and suddenly like people wanted to talk to me, and it was a lot for me. I had an undiagnosed anxiety disorder, and things were weird for a while, but they're good now. Anyway. But yeah, so it doesn't exactly come back because like I have gone to therapy and medicated myself to treat my anxiety disorder, and so I don't really like worry about the same thing again. But you know, it would be great to have something adapted again. I feel like once you've done it, you learn a lot of different things about the industry and how it works and how to handle yourself, and what to say yes to and what to say no to. So if it happened again, I'm not like, that would be awesome. First of all, from a career standpoint, like the movies were great for my career, so I don't regret them at all. But I think I don't feel like, I don't think about it because what I can control is the book, and that's what I care about. So, you know, if something happened in the future, that would be great, but I'm focused on like the words on the page that I can control. So I don't think about it so much. But weirdest thing while researching?
Oh, I mean, there's a lot in the 10 low books, but I think the thing that I can just talk about at the moment is the novella I'm currently writing, which is kind of based, there's a lot of Gaulish mythology in there, and I mean, the Gauls were weird. Like, their mythology is bizarre. I mean, there's one guy, a god called Ogmius, and he has silver chains running from his tongue into people's ears. And so I read that and was like, oh,
that's awesome.
that is going in. It's going in. I also got really obsessed with zithers, like lap harps, to the extent that I bought one, and I'm now obsessed with learning it. So that's a deep rabbit hole I've gone on. It's like quite a committed one.
I like that. Yeah. Sort of oddly similarly to the Gaul stuff being weird is the Slavic stuff being weird. I read a book called Slavic Folklore, and in it they talk about urban legends that kind of are more recent additions to folklore. And after the fall of the Berlin Wall and the opening up, whatever. Sorry, not to be whatever about like large important parts of history, but you understand. I'm trying not to talk forever. But there were all these rumors about like what was coming in from the West, and one of them is that like there was this legend going around about these dolls that were being imported from Western countries that were apparently like haunted and full of blood. So like if it broke, it would like spill blood all over the floor. That's pretty weird.
That is amazing.
Yeah, and it's from like relatively recently. Like people thought this was real. I love it.
That similarly to that, I will stop on the
we could talk about this forever.
But there's a particular polka that I was learning, and it's known as the landmine polka because these particular landmines it was one of the Soviet-Finnish conflicts. They were set to go off when a certain series of chords were played, and no one could understand why these landmines were exploding everywhere.
What?
And it was because when they played these 3 chords, they would explode. And so once they worked this out, they put a loudspeaker on a truck and drove it around the countryside, playing this one polka over and over. And all these landmines would just be going off everywhere. So again, that was a bit of weird.
That's pretty amazing.
Stuff. So yeah, I'm learning the landmine polka, obviously.
All right, who's got another question? I'm going to go to this side of the room.
Korea's like, stop talking about landmines.
Oh.
We're at half past. Are we?
I'm sorry. So one of my favorite things about the books that I've read from you are the different points of view. So about Arch Conspirator, I wanted to ask, how did you decide to add more points of view and to like expand some of the characters? Because I don't think Ismene has that much role in the original, and same as Heyman. Is that how it's pronounced?
Yeah.
Yeah. So I wanted to know, how do you decide that?
Yeah, so I think that was the exciting part about writing the novella, was the ability to expand some of the POVs. But with Heyman, it's interesting. So the version of Antigone that we've all read is by Aeschylus, I think. If I get this wrong, I'm going to be so sad. It's been a while since I did this research. But there are other versions like where bits of it survive. And the one by Euripides is like a romance. Like Haman and Antigone survive, and then they like run away together and have kids. And I was like, oh, that's nice. I will not be doing that. However, I would like the
I
kind
would
of...
say spoilers, but I mean, it's like...
It's a tragedy, guys, come on.
It's quite old Antigone now.
Yes,
so,
I know. Anyway, so I wanted him in it because I wanted a thread of romance, because I First of all, because I love it, and also because I think it's like so much worse what ends up happening to her if she feels like she has this like potential that's growing and something that she's leaving behind. So I wanted him for that reason, for tragic reasons. And as for Ismene, I just think she's an underexplored character in the play. She is trying to kind of bridge the gap between all of her family members, and she doesn't do it perfectly. And I just thought she was a sympathetic figure to me as someone who's like been kind of the child. I have some siblings, and you know, sometimes you're in the middle of their conflict, and I just wanted to represent her a little bit. So I think it was always just like a little bit of curiosity about the character and about what they might say to me if I let them speak. And that's really how it felt. I was like, I'm just going to see what happens if I start writing from her perspective, and it turned out pretty well. So I think that's really why the POVs.
Okay, we can probably get 2 more questions in, so just keep your questions concise. I'm going to get these 2 right here.
Hi, have you ever considered exploring any other genres of writing? And also, in terms of the Divergent series, when did you decide that you, sorry, spoilers for anybody, but when did you decide that you wanted Tris to die at the end? Like, was that something you always had the intent of?
Yeah. Okay, so I did decide, I'm going to answer that one first because it's going to be top of mind. But I decided at the start of right after I wrote the rough draft of Divergent and I had to think of it as a series, I started to think about how I thought it would end. And I think I was thinking about, like, when they made the Gladiator movie, they were like, okay, he's going to die at the end because gladiators in this time period only lasted like 30 days, basically. That was like the average. And I just thought about her as someone who grew up like being expected to sacrifice herself at any given time. That was like how she was raised. And I thought, there's an expiration date on this person. That was kind of the feeling that I had. Obviously, people did not agree with me, which is fine. Everyone's reaction is fair, but that was kind of that's when I thought of it. And what was your other, have I thought about writing in other genres? Okay. Yeah, kind of. I love science fiction and fantasy, so I'm always, like, I feel like there's just fertile ground in those 2 genres and where they kind of like mesh together, and I don't feel the need to go outside of them. Like, this is what I love. It's what I've always loved to read. It's what I like to write. Sometimes I'm like, maybe I'll like explore a little, like I'll add a little more horror or a little more mystery. But I think they're always going to be incorporated into the genre fiction. Do you ever think about writing outside of?
I mean, I write under 3 different names.
Yeah, you've got a lot already.
I cover some genres.
Yeah, you're writing westerns and sci-fi and
Yep.
yeah. Okay, got it.
Historical.
All right, fine. Contemporary? No.
Sort of.
All right.
Yeah, sometimes.
All right, who was the one more question over here?
Hi there. I like writing, but I hate reading my work back. How do I metaphorically bury the body of my inner critic?
Oh, okay. Do you have any tips for this?
I think give it some time before, you know, sometimes when you've written something straight away, you'll go back the next day and you'll be like, oh, whoa, oh, God. But I think maybe let stuff settle a little bit and then return to it. You kind of just have to power through and find, there'll always be things you don't like. I try to think of my work sometimes in the same way as a painting. You know, you'll remember certain details in it. They'll be the ones that stick in your mind, but the rest of it has to be there. So even if there are scenes which you feel aren't as strong, they're still necessary to tell the story. And then you'll have those bits where you're like, I know I've nailed it there.
Mm-hmm.
But that's kind of how I try to think of my work, and the bits that I don't feel are quite as, you know, groundbreaking as some others.
Yeah, I think I try to acknowledge growth. I am a self-deprecating person naturally, so I have a big inner critic, but I also believe that I'm a hard worker and that I am able to think critically about my work, and I think that's a skill. So over time, it's gotten easier to feel good about it because I think I didn't used to do that well, and now I do. And I get proud of those moments instead of being like, I'm amazing, everything I write is like the most amazing thing ever. That was never gonna be me. But I think being able to acknowledge that you've put in the work and you've done the very best thing that you're capable of is a different way of thinking about it. It doesn't need to be like toxic positivity. You know, it can be like, I do this well, maybe I don't do this as well. Like, I'm gonna try and work on that area, but I'm gonna acknowledge that like I've done a good job at this thing. So that's my recommendation. I think that's it.
All right, that is it. Thank you so much to everyone for coming out, and a big thanks to Stark and Veronica for taking the time with us today.